Hi there, folks. Eric from Hit Subscribe here, and I am doing yet another installment in the Freelancer Q&A series that I do on this channel, in our community, and then also put onto the YouTube channel, and also these days now a podcast. So if you see me saying this anywhere and you're wondering how to get a hold of that podcast, I can get you information about that as well. Just trying to do all the things, I guess. This is an interesting question. So this is a little bit different than normal. This question wasn't asked of me directly, though I did answer it. It wasn't that I was just butting in to give unsolicited advice. I'm actually in a private forum for agency owners, which occasionally has some interesting content and exchanges. And this is a question asked by somebody that I know, like an agency owner that I'm friends with. And she was asking a question about how would you or should you price an hour-long training session to help a company's sales staff learn how to be better at social media, and I think prospecting through social media. Now, the reason I'm poaching that question, I did go in there and answer, and she seemed to appreciate my opinion, or at least she was polite about it. But the reason I wanted to bring this up here is because I get a lot of questions in the community and from my historical following of freelance developers and indies and such about pricing, especially when it comes to the practical application of pricing. So I am personally of the school of thought that I don't like time and materials and hourly as a way of setting rates or price or whatever. I hate consuming things by the hour. I try never ever to charge clients by the hour. I'm just not a fan of it. So when I say that, and I say, think about cost plus pricing, flat pricing, value pricing, that type of thing, it can be hard for people, especially if you're used to being an employee where you're compensated for your time, to wrap your head around what are some examples. And I thought this was kind of a fascinating one to do here in this venue because your options for this particular piece of work to be done would actually kind of run the gamut. And there's reasons to do all of the different pricing models that I can think of. So I thought this might be maybe the perfect example in the community here to run through all of the different ways you could price this, what it would look like and why, because it's both simple and in some ways like subtle, like there's nuance to this. So let me get into that. Again, the question is, and I'm assuming most of the audience probably wouldn't really be qualified for this, but assume you were qualified for this and somebody was saying, hey, you seem like you're really good at social media. I want to bring you in to teach my sales department how to also be good at social media, presumably because that business wants to use social media as a prospecting channel for their sales folks. So let's look at the first thing that you could do, which is just price the hour. And this is, the kind of pricing theory that I don't much care for, but it's the most straightforward. So if you were out there in the freelance world and you had an established hourly rate that was published on your website, it's an hour of your time. So you could theoretically say, well, I charge normally $150 an hour. We're talking about an hour of my time, so I will do this for $150. I wouldn't do that, but it's the easiest thing to reason about it. It's an hour of your time. Now, you could also say, well, I'm going to include the travel to and from the site, and there's probably some preparation that's going to go into it. So, hey, this 1 hour of my time actually corresponds to maybe 8 hours of my time. So I'm going to charge you, would that be $1,200? Because I actually think I'm going to put 8 hours of time into this. That would also probably be acceptable for something like this if you reasoned through that pricing and you presented a proposal saying, I estimate that this will be 8 hours of my time. The person, who would sign off on this would probably say, all right, fair enough. I don't imagine that somebody who's asking someone like this person to do this work is thinking that there will only be 1 hour that goes into it. There will be the time spent putting together the agenda for the hour, putting together the presentation materials, traveling to and from the site. So all of that would be appropriate. You could also make it a true time and materials engagement because, maybe you're, coming with lunch for everybody. You're going to have some gas. There's going to be some kind of expense. If it's not like regional, you might actually be flying to do this on site. So, pardon me. That is where the materials comes in for time and materials engagement. So you would send them, an invoice for your time, and then you would also pass on the expense of, the flight or the hotel or whatever was going into this. Now, for me personally, I don't really like inviting clients to get into the details of what class of cabin I sit in on the airplane, or what's an acceptable like hotel to stay at, or whether I should rent from Hertz or budget or whatever. So typically, anytime I'm doing a travel type of engagement, I will estimate what I would personally want to spend on that trip and then kind of round up and say, okay, I'm going to do this for $1,200 plus. So $1,200 maybe for a virtual, or $2,500 if you want me to come on site. So I would just set two prices, and one would be the on site and one would be to do something virtually. And then it's really kind of in my world, like if I overestimate the cost of the travel by a bit, it's kind of up to me if I want to, fly Spirit Airlines clinging to the bottom of the plane and rent a car and sleep in it, I can save some money. Or if I want to go for a more luxurious travel experience, maybe it eats into my profit a little bit, but that's okay. I'd rather that be my problem than something I duke it out with a client. I personally, many, many years of business travel, both for myself and for other organizations, it's just a hassle to get into the business of conforming to somebody's corporate expense policy when they're not your employer, and they're saying, oh, we don't really approve stays at the, Spring Hill Suites. You can only stay at the Marriott. Like, I don't want that in my life. So if you're going to price the travel, I personally would avoid doing time and materials unless they really insist on it. And instead I would just bake the estimated cost of my trip into the thing that I quote them. And then your travel arrangements are not their problem. So those are kind of the basic ways. I'll call these the beginner way to price an engagement like this. It is not really what I would do. It's a time and materials type of thing. Now you could do, I guess, cost plus pricing, but for a pure services type of engagement like this, your cost is really just kind of whatever you would want your salary to be, with a little layer on top for profit margin. So those aren't materially different here. You could think about, let's say that you weren't going to do this, but you were going to hire some kind of social media person to do this. What would you have to pay a social media expert to give a seminar like this? And then you could layer a margin on top of it or something, but that's still a little awkward. I don't think I would get into the business of pricing something like this cost plus, just because the only real cost here is going to be the effort that you put into it, plus the hour, and then, whatever expenses are under consideration here. But for instance, let's say that they wanted you to come in and do a whole series of disparate trainings. So they wanted you to train their sales staff in how to be good at social media, but they also wanted you to train their sales staff in, executive presence or something. And then they also wanted you to train their sales staff in how to use a new CRM. Now you would probably be bringing in other people to supplement that. And you could think of okay, what is my cost to have this material created? What is my cost to go out and get other trainers to come in under my umbrella, and my cost to manage all this? And then I'm going to layer some margin on top of that. And that's the project. But, just for this one thing, I don't think cost plus looks much different than time and materials. So let's get into, I don't know what you will call this pricing model exactly, but it's different than time and materials, and it's different than value pricing, and it's different than cost plus. I might just more call this market pricing. And here's what I mean. If you were to go out and look at people that do corporate training, you could price comparably to somebody in the market. So you would not be the first person in human history to come in and do an event for an hour or an afternoon or something. You could start to look around and look at what people typically charge companies to come in and do training. And if you do that, what you're going to find is that it's fairly typical for trainers to charge in buckets depending on attendance. So you might see a pricing model where if there's 0 to 10 attendees, it's $1,000 for the session. 10 to 30 is $3,000. I'm just making up figures, but you do see something like that where conceptually they're charging the more people you're training, the more it costs. So that's one pricing model that's common in the industry. Another one might just be to look at like the duration of time and see what people charge. But here's what I'm getting at. Go out and look for similar-ish kind of on-site corporate trainings and people who do that and people who do those. See what they charge and then probably charge somewhat less than that, since I'm guessing if you're asking how to price this, this is new to you. So it wouldn't really be fair to the client to charge the going industry rate for something that you're a novice at. I mean, at least, if you can get away with it, there is a whole school of thought that kind of treats the clients as, marks or adversaries and bargaining, and you should charge them as much as they're willing to pay. For me, I don't believe in that. So if I'm doing something that's new to me, the client is assuming a little bit more risk than if they went with a seasoned professional. So because they're assuming more risk, I think that should cost them less. Plus, it gives me an at bat to do something new. And if I do a few of those, sure, I can start charging the market rate. But I'm a believer in discounting stuff that's novel to you and being upfront about that. So that's the other option that is really kind of related to or it's closer to time and materials, where you're saying, I'm just going to go out and do a little bit of research and see what's customary to charge here. So I guess market rate pricing, if you will, and then up to you if you want to discount a little bit below market rate to reflect your experience or lack thereof with this type of engagement. So moving on now, value pricing. This is one that I really wanted to bring to the community because it's actually pretty easy to reason about from a value pricing perspective. And I believe, if memory serves, this is probably the answer I gave in the venue. But basically, you're training somebody's sales staff. There is no easier thing to trace to return on investment than things that salespeople are doing. So if you have, 10 salespeople and each of them are bringing in $1 million a year in revenue for this business, let's say, the sales group is bringing in 10 million a year in revenue. If you were to do some work with them on their prospecting and you were able to get that figure for each average salesperson via their awesome new social media prospecting skills up to 1.1 million in revenue, well, your training seminar just generated an incremental 1 million in revenue for the business across these 10 salespeople, $1 million a year in annual revenue that you just helped them pluck out of the ether by making their sales workforce more efficient. So, if you could do this hypothetical extra $1 million in revenue that could be attributed to your training, then it's fair to come in and say, this is probably worth, 50 grand, right? By my estimation, if each of your people gets better at sales prospecting, the first year alone, this is going to bring in an additional $1 million of top line revenue. And then do that year over year. You might institutionalize this training as you grow and hire more salespeople. This is going to generate a lot of money for you. I don't think it's unreasonable for me to ask for $50,000. What I'm talking about there is actually you're asking for like 5% of the first year value that you're realizing. That might be a little high by your estimation. It's just an hour of your time in a prep. So you could do that same thing and come to the conclusion that you should charge them 10 or 20,000. You kind of have to feel out what you're comfortable for, but value-based pricing is really, in my estimation, about kind of two things. One is how plausibly can you draw a line from what you're going to do to value and be credible to the client. So they need to be confident that you can actually achieve a sort of quantifiable amount of value. And then the other piece of that is going to be the narrative, like when you sit down. If they believe you, I think I can get you an extra $1 million a year in revenue. So I think it's fair that I ask for 5% of that or 1%. And that's kind of going to be kind of subjective and depend on your relationship with the client and, a variety of factors. So that one's really about feel. If you're charging 1, 2, 5% in this model, or in this scenario, you're talking about $10,000 to $50,000. Any of that's going to more, when I was talking about time and materials, I'm talking about 1, 2,000, maybe a professional trainer, it's like 4,000. Any of the value price options I talk about here are going to more than clear. They're going to be very profitable for you. So really you have to kind of feel out like what seems fair here. It's all going to be a nice payday for you. But you're not looking to extort them or whatever. Like, well, I think that this could lead to $1 million in revenue for you, and I want 3/4 of that. It has to be done somewhat by feel, but it has to seem fair to both parties. But again, this really depends on them accepting the premise that it's going to generate an additional $1 million in revenue. So you might be wondering, How do you start reasoning about that? Again, this is a nice one to walk through, because here's what I would do if I were going to try to value price something like this. I would look at what their sales folks are currently doing on social media, kind of try to take inventory of that. How many followers do they have? How often are they producing content in those venues? And then I would look to gather data as part of the discovery process up front. Like, okay, how many of your current sales come in through something attributable to the sales people's activity on social media? What you're really trying to go after is to set a baseline for how much revenue is currently attributable to that channel. And then to think, okay, I could, teach these people how to grow more followers on these media. I could teach people how to use it more effectively to generate, more leads, and so on and so forth. So you want to get specific and data focused about it, and then construct some scenarios, and those scenarios should seem reasonable. Like, okay, most of your leads from the channel come in through, your salespeople's existing follower bases. So there's a decent flow of people. Your average salesperson has, 1,000 followers on Twitter and 3,000 followers on LinkedIn, and it's generating this amount of business. I think I can help you grow those followings in a way that tracks with that lead qualification percentage. I think I can help them double their followings in the next year because I'm good at social media. So if we assume that I double their followings, and we assume that that doubles the amount of prospects, and all those conversion percentages track through, it's going to double your revenue attributable to this channel. Right now, that revenue attributable to the channel is $400,000 a year. I think I can bring that up to $800,000 a year if all of this bears out. So that's just a quick off the cuff example, but the more you tie it to data, the more you're building a case like that, documenting your assumptions and their reasonable assumptions, the more that the prospect is going to believe your vision, rather than just saying like, oh, sure, if you bring me in, I'm pretty sure you guys will generate an extra 40 million a year in sales. If I were the person, trying to engage you, I'd say like, well, what do you base that on? Like, show me any data. What's suggestive of that? If you're proactively laying out all the data and saying, here is why I say this, point out where my assumptions are wrong. Number one, that builds a lot more credibility. Number two, they might literally point out where your assumptions are wrong, and then you can just adjust the realizable value accordingly. So if you're saying, well, it looks like the 10% of your business is attributable to the social media channel, and they come back and say, no, it's more like 5%. Well, okay, now instead of boosting the business by $1 million, you're boosting it by 500,000. So now your 1% is 5,000 and your 5% is 2,500. Wait, no, 25,000. Yeah. So 5,000 to 25,000 instead of 10 to 50,000, probably still a pretty good payday. And now you're operating with better data. So that is a good example of at least how I approach value pricing. Try to gather as much concrete data as possible and build out an entire end-to-end ROI hypothesis. And it's why I like this example so much, because anything going on in sales is typically much easier to track to revenue than just about anything else that the business does. So I kind of leapt at this example to talk through it in this channel. Now, all of that said, none of these things are what I would personally do if I were in the service business. And let me tell you why. So what I would probably do is price this as a loss leader, or just do it for free. So if you think of a business, and the person we're talking about here is in the marketing org chart and does consulting in and around marketing. So you've got a client who's saying, hey, I want you to come in and teach my sales workforce how to be better at social media, essentially teach my salespeople how to be better at marketing. I would look out ahead of this and think there's maybe an engagement to be had here. If I go in and I say, well, it's going to be an hour of my time and I want to charge $200 an hour or whatever, plus all the hours I spend preparing this, I'm going to write up a whole stinking proposal for like $800 and then send it over. It just seems so nickel and dimey. I think what I would rather do is, assuming we're not talking about like expensive travel and things here, I would probably go back and say like, listen, let me just do this. It's not that much of my time. I've got an existing playbook here I could walk through. What if I set up an initial presentation and we just went through it? What I get out of that is, I can polish this up and maybe see if there's more demand for it. Maybe there's other sales groups here in your organization that I can perform this for. And if everybody seems to get value, then, maybe I'll start charging you for it. But I've never done this before. I don't know how useful it's going to be. So maybe we just do it, see what happens. We make notes, we retrospect, and then I figure out if there's enough value here for me to charge you and for me to charge, potentially other customers. And then you become my first testimonial. So that is all of my stated motivation that I would tell the client, and it's true. You're bringing me in to do something I've never done before. How do I know how to charge you? I don't know exactly how much value you're going to get out of this. Let me try to help you. We'll just see what happens. That is all true. If it goes well, I could sell it to other organizations. I could sell it, again, to their organization, to other salespeople. So there's potential upside. But the thing that it also does is it gets me licensed to ask a whole bunch of questions as a consultant. Why are you relying on your salespeople to do marketing? Do you not have marketing people? What prompted this? What are you hoping to get out of this? What does your marketing organization think? Why don't your marketers teach these? So that discovery becomes pretty natural. I mean, like, sure, pre-engagement, you could do it, I guess, but all of that becomes natural as you're working through this together. And if somebody is looking to an outside entity to teach their salespeople how to do marketing activities, my guess is they need some marketing help somewhere. And that marketing help that they could probably use is going to go way beyond just an hour presentation about social media in scope. So I would kind of view this as a potential to get into the world of this organization and do some discovery and sniff out some pretty serious consulting opportunities or collaborative opportunities there in a way that builds a lot of goodwill. This is actually something that's pretty common for me to do. I do it with Hit Subscribe, with anything custom that we take on, and I've done it over the years, where people come to me and say, could I pay you for an hour of your time or this or that to, do this thing? And often what I'll say is like, look, let's just do some work together, because I don't know what value this is going to have to you until I actually get in here and do it. I'm willing to spend an hour or two working with you, for the sake of a relationship, and I like to help people. And I'll tell you what, after that amount of time, if I see an opportunity that I think is profitable for me and would be a good spend for you to engage me, I'll let you know. And maybe that'll happen or maybe it won't, but I don't really want to write up a proposal for $800 for a few hours of my time and go through all that. I mean, it makes you look kind of desperate and cheap. For me, at least in my consulting days, I probably wouldn't really want to write a proposal that was, I don't know, less than 5 figures to do any kind of consulting work. Maybe mid 4 figures if it were something like better defined, but like, anything under 4 figures or like at the bottoms of 4 figures, it just seems like, I don't know. There's a certain je ne sais quoi to this, but it just feels like you need to pay your rent. Versus if you're just like, don't worry about the $1,200. Like, let's just talk. Let me see what I can do for you. There might be opportunities here. That's the kind of vibe I'm going for. So that kind of runs through all the options. Sure, you could price it by the hour. You could price it time and materials, maybe even try to upsell them to like multiple sessions or half a day. I really don't like that. I think better would be to see what corporate trainers normally do and mimic that, maybe at a lower price point. The value-based option is even better than that if you can pull it off and kind of wrap your head around how to do that. But for my money, especially if you're a consultant, the best option at all is this loss leader one. Charge them a nominal amount to cover your lunch or charge them nothing, and make it clear that you're more interested in getting to know them and thinking about longer term, higher value things to do together than you are clawing $800 out of them for a few hours of your time. So hopefully that is interesting foray into pricing theory here. I did think this was a good opportunity, even though it wasn't a question I was specifically asked. I did answer it. And in all seriousness, I think the answer was well received, if I remember, or my friend was just polite, but hopefully it makes for a good example and piece of content in this particular channel. And hopefully that helps some of you, and I will catch you all next time.